My husband sent a voice message by mistake, and it made me sick to my stomach from disgust. At him and my best friend. Before continuing the story, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories, and leave your like on the video. I need to tell you this story because I can't keep it inside anymore. 3 months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 28, working as a pediatric nurse at Children's Memorial Hospital, and completely convinced I was living a fairy tale. My fiancé and I had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months. We'd moved into this beautiful 2-bedroom apartment downtown last spring, splitting the $1,500 rent perfectly down the middle. He worked as a graphic designer at a marketing firm, and we made a decent living together. Our wedding was set for October 15th, just 6 weeks away when everything fell apart. But back then, I was floating on cloud 9. We'd spend Sunday mornings at the farmer's market, picking out fresh vegetables and planning elaborate dinners we'd cook together. He'd make coffee in this French press his aunt gave us, and we'd sit on our tiny balcony overlooking the park, talking about our future kids and whether we'd get a house in the suburbs or stay urban. My best friend since high school was practically living with us. She'd come over every Friday night with takeout from that Thai place on 5th Street, and we'd binge-watch shows until midnight. She knew everything about our relationship, how he proposed at the beach last Christmas, how nervous he got meeting my parents, even intimate details I probably shouldn't have shared. She was going to be my maid of honor. The 3 of us were inseparable. Weekend trips to the mountains, double dates when she was seeing someone, game nights that lasted until dawn. She had keys to our apartment and would sometimes crash on our couch after particularly rough nights at the bar where she worked. I loved having my 2 favorite people so close. I remember thinking how lucky I was. My coworkers would complain about their boyfriends or husbands, but I genuinely couldn't relate. He brought me flowers every other Tuesday. Not roses, but these mixed bouquets from the grocery store because he said they reminded him of my personality. Colorful and unexpected. He'd leave little notes in my scrubs pocket before I left for 12-hour shifts. We were planning this October wedding that felt like something out of a magazine. The venue was this gorgeous garden restaurant outside town, $3,000 for the day, which felt like a fortune, but was worth every penny. My dress was hanging in our closet, this simple but elegant thing I'd found on sale for $800. We'd taste-tested 6 different cake flavors and settled on lemon with raspberry filling. Our guest list was 93 people. We'd addressed invitations together on the dining table, laughing at my terrible handwriting and his perfectionist tendencies. His parents were flying in from Oregon. Mine were driving down from their retirement community in Florida. Everything was coordinated, confirmed, and paid for. The funny thing is, I can't remember a single red flag from that time. Maybe I was too blinded by happiness, or maybe I just trusted too easily. He seemed genuinely excited about the wedding, about our future. He'd talk about kids we might have, showing me houses online that we could maybe afford in 5 or 10 years. My best friend seemed just as invested in our happiness. She helped me pick out bridesmaid dresses, threw me a small engagement party at her apartment, and spent hours helping me research photographers and flowers. She'd joke that she was going to steal him if I ever messed up. But it felt harmless then. Just the kind of thing friends say. Looking back now, I wonder if there were signs I missed. But honestly, I don't think there were. I think some people are just really good at pretending until they're not. And when the mask finally slips, it doesn't just fall off. It gets ripped away so violently that you can't believe you ever thought it was real. That Tuesday in September started like any other day. I worked a long shift at the hospital, dealing with sick kids and worried parents. I was exhausted but happy, looking forward to getting home to him, to our life, to our future. I had no idea that by the end of that night, everything I thought I knew about love, friendship, and myself would be destroyed by a single misdirected voice message. I got home around 7:30 that evening, completely drained from a 12-hour shift. We'd had 3 emergency admissions, and I'd barely had time for lunch. All I wanted was a hot shower and maybe some leftover pizza from the weekend. As I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed with a voice message. I saw his name and smiled, thinking he was probably telling me he'd pick up dinner or asking what I wanted to watch later. We did this all the time. Little audio messages throughout the day, staying connected despite our busy schedules. I hit play while kicking off my shoes, expecting to hear his usual, "Hey babe, hope your shift wasn't too crazy" greeting. Instead, what I heard made my blood turn to ice. God, I can't stop thinking about what happened yesterday. I know I shouldn't have kissed you. I know it was wrong, but I haven't felt anything like that in, I don't even know how long. His voice was different, raw, desperate in a way I'd never heard. I'm sorry if I made things weird, but I had to tell you how I feel. I stood frozen in our hallway, my nursing bag still slung over my shoulder, trying to process what I was hearing. The truth is, I've been going through the motions with her for months now. Maybe longer. She's so predictable. Everything is always the same conversations, the same routines, the same everything. I feel like I'm suffocating. When I'm with you, I feel alive again. My hands started shaking. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake. I know this sounds terrible, but sometimes when we're together, me and her, I just feel nothing, like I'm dead inside. She'll be talking about her day or planning something for the wedding, and I'm just nodding along, thinking about how boring my life has become, how boring she's made it. I sank onto our couch, the couch we'd picked out together, the couch where my best friend spent every Friday night, and listened to my fiancé destroy me with words I never imagined he was capable of saying. You want to know the worst part? The physical stuff has become like a chore. I have to fake interest, fake enthusiasm. With her, everything feels so mechanical, obligatory. But yesterday, when you kissed me back, when I touched you, Christ, I remember what desire actually feels like. I was going to be sick. Actually, physically sick. She's a good person. I know that. She's responsible and caring and all those things you're supposed to want in a wife. But she's also, God, this sounds awful. She's just so bland, so safe. There's no fire, no spontaneity. She's exactly the same person she was 4 years ago. Nothing surprises me anymore. The message continued, each word feeling like a physical blow. You, though, you're different. You challenge me. You're unpredictable and interesting and sexy in ways she could never be. When we're all together, I find myself watching you instead of listening to her talk about whatever mundane thing happened at work. I realized I was crying, ugly sobs that were making it hard to breathe. I know the timing is horrible with the wedding coming up, but I can't pretend anymore. I can't marry her feeling like this. I can't spend the rest of my life pretending to be happy with someone who makes me feel so empty. The message was 5 minutes long. 5 minutes of my fiancé comparing me to my best friend and finding me lacking in every possible way. 5 minutes of him explaining how repulsed he'd become by our relationship, our intimacy, our entire life together. I need to know if what happened yesterday meant something to you too, or if it was just a moment of weakness. Because if it was real, if you feel even a fraction of what I'm feeling, then maybe we can figure this out. Maybe I can find the courage to end things with her and start something real with you. The message ended with, I love you. Not the way I thought I loved her, but really love you. Call me when you get this. I sat there in complete silence for I don't know how long, holding my phone like it was a bomb that had just exploded in my hands. The apartment felt different, smaller, suffocating. Every piece of furniture, every photo on the wall, every shared memory felt contaminated by what I'd just heard. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just betrayal. This was systematic emotional destruction delivered in his own voice, with his own words, meant for the ears of the person I trusted most in the world. I looked at our engagement photo on the side table, both of us grinning like idiots, her arm around my shoulder, all three of us squeezed into the frame at some party last year. The same photo I'd looked at thousands of times with nothing but warmth and gratitude. Now, all I could see were two people who had been lying to my face while discussing how pathetic I was behind my back. I ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. After I finished throwing up, I sat on our bathroom floor for what felt like hours, replaying every word of that message. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal, it was how specific and cruel his observations were. He hadn't just said he didn't love me anymore. He'd systematically dissected every aspect of who I was and found it wanting. Predictable, boring, dead inside when I'm with her, mechanical, bland. These weren't words said in anger during a fight. This was a calculated assessment of my worth as a human being, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone discussing a disappointing meal. I kept thinking about all the times recently when I'd tried to be more spontaneous. Last month, I'd surprised him with tickets to that concert he mentioned wanting to see. He'd seemed pleased but distracted, checking his phone throughout the show. 2 weeks ago, I'd suggested we try that new sushi place instead of our usual Friday night pizza. He'd agreed but spent the entire dinner comparing it unfavorably to places he'd been with work friends. Now I understood. It wasn't that he hadn't noticed my efforts. He'd decided they were pathetic attempts from someone fundamentally boring trying to be interesting. Every gesture of love or adventure was just more evidence of how predictable I was. But the comparison to her, that was what made me feel like my skin was crawling. He'd talked about her like she was everything I wasn't. Alive. Interesting. Sexy in ways she could never be. He'd watched her while I was talking, fantasized about her while touching me. How long had this been going on? How many Friday nights had they exchanged knowing looks while I rambled about my day? How many times had I confided in her about our relationship while she was actively working to destroy it? I thought about yesterday. Tuesday. What had happened yesterday? I'd worked a double shift, covering for another nurse who'd called in sick. I hadn't gotten home until almost 10, and he was already asleep. Or pretending to be asleep. She must have come over while I was at work. They must have been alone in our apartment, in our space, discussing how tedious I was before finally acting on whatever had been building between them. The kiss he mentioned, "I shouldn't have kissed you," made it sound like he'd initiated it. But then he said, "when you kissed me back," which meant she'd participated willingly. This wasn't some drunken mistake or moment of weakness. This was two people who'd been wanting this, planning this, maybe for months. I crawled to our bedroom and looked at our bed with new eyes. Had they been here? On sheets I'd washed and pillows I'd fluffed? Had my fiancé and best friend explored their mutual attraction while discussing my shortcomings? The engagement ring on my finger felt like it was burning. I'd been so proud of it. Not huge or flashy, but thoughtful. He'd saved for months to buy it, or so he'd told me. Now I wondered if he'd been fantasizing about putting it on someone else's finger. Our wedding planning suddenly took on a nightmarish quality. All those evenings we'd spent addressing invitations, tasting cakes, finalizing details. Had he been going through the motions while privately planning his escape? Had she been helping me plan a wedding to a man who was already emotionally checked out? I remembered her helping me pick out bridesmaid dresses just 2 weeks ago. We'd spent an entire Saturday driving to 3 different shops, trying to find something that looked good on all 4 bridesmaids. She'd been so enthusiastic, so invested in making sure everything was perfect. The whole time, she was planning to steal my groom. The cruelest part was realizing I had no one to call. In moments of crisis, she was always my first call. When my grandmother died last year, she was at our apartment within 20 minutes, holding me while I cried. When I was worried about a patient or stressed about work, she listened for hours and gave thoughtful advice. Now, sitting alone in our apartment, I understood that I'd lost 2 people in the span of 5 minutes. My fiancé and my best friend had been systematically dismantling my sense of self-worth while I trusted them completely. I looked around our bedroom, at his clothes in the closet, at the book I'd bought him sitting on his nightstand, at the photo of us from our trip to the beach last summer. Everything felt contaminated. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a stage set where 2 people had been performing their affection for me while falling in love with each other. The worst part was that I could already hear their justifications. They'd say it just happened. They'd say they fought their feelings. They'd say they never meant to hurt me. But that message told a different story. One of someone who'd been analyzing my inadequacies for months, building a case for why I deserved to be discarded. I realized I was still wearing my scrubs from the hospital, still had my hair in the same ponytail I'd worn for 12 hours while taking care of other people's children. I looked exactly like what he'd described. Predictable, boring, exactly the same person I was 4 years ago. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was everything he'd said I was. But did that mean I deserved to be humiliated like this? Did being bland mean I deserved to have the 2 people I loved most conspire against me behind my back? I couldn't stay in that apartment. Everything felt poisoned. The couch where we'd planned our future. The kitchen where we'd cooked together. The bedroom where I now questioned every intimate moment we'd shared. I threw some clothes into my old college duffel bag, grabbed my laptop and nursing textbooks, and left before he came home. I drove around for 2 hours before finally checking into a budget motel on the highway. The room was depressing. Stained carpet, flickering fluorescent light, the smell of cigarettes soaked into everything. But it was mine. No shared memories, no contaminated spaces, no reminders of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. Lying on that scratchy bedspread, I replayed the audio message again and again, torturing myself with the specific words he'd used. She's exactly the same person she was 4 years ago. Nothing surprises me anymore. The dismissive way he'd said it, like being consistent, was a character flaw, rather than a virtue. I'd always thought stability was something to be proud of. I showed up for my shifts, paid my bills on time, remembered birthdays, kept my promises. In nursing school, they'd taught us that reliability was one of the most important qualities in healthcare. Patients and families needed to trust that you'd be there, that you'd do what you said you'd do. But to him, reliability meant boring. Consistency meant predictable. Being the same person he'd fallen in love with 4 years ago wasn't evidence of authentic character. It was proof that I'd failed to evolve into someone worthy of his continued interest. The isolation was crushing. For 4 years, every significant moment in my life had been shared with both of them. Good news from work, family drama, health scares, celebrations. They were my first calls, my built-in support system. Now I was completely alone with the worst thing that had ever happened to me. I tried to think of other friends I could call, but our social circle revolved around them. The people from work I was friendly with didn't know about my personal life. My college friends had scattered across the country. My family lived 800 miles away and would be devastated to learn their future son-in-law was a fraud. Wednesday morning came with no sleep and 17 missed calls from him. I'd turned my phone to silent but watched it light up throughout the night. By morning, there were 12 voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to, and 43 text messages that I could see the previews of. "Where are you? Please come home. We need to talk." "I can explain." She'd called 6 times and sent a series of increasingly frantic texts. I could see enough of the preview to know she was playing the victim. "I need to explain what really happened. Please don't hate me. It's not what you think." But I knew exactly what it was. I'd heard it in his own words, delivered in that intimate tone he'd never used with me. The tone of someone sharing his deepest truth with the person who actually mattered to him. I called in sick to work, which I'd never done in 3 years unless I was actually ill. My supervisor sounded concerned. I'd always been the reliable one, the one who covered other people's shifts, not the one who needed coverage. I managed to croak out something about food poisoning and hung up before she could ask questions. By noon, I'd found a small furnished room to rent week to week in a house near the hospital. The landlady was this elderly woman who seemed to specialize in housing people in transition, divorce, job loss, life falling apart. The room was tiny but clean, with a single bed, a desk, and a shared bathroom down the hall. $200 a week, utilities included. I moved my few belongings from the motel to this new space and tried to figure out what came next. The wedding was 6 weeks away. We'd put deposits down on everything: venue, catering, flowers, photography. My dress was hanging in the closet of an apartment I couldn't bear to enter. But the practical concerns felt secondary to the emotional devastation. I kept hearing his voice describing our physical intimacy as mechanical and obligatory. How long had he been faking it? How many times had I initiated sex thinking we were connecting, while he was just going through the motions and thinking about her? She's so bland, so safe. There's no fire, no spontaneity. The words played on repeat in my mind. I'd thought our relationship was built on genuine compatibility and deep affection. To him, apparently, it was built on my failure to be someone more exciting. The comparison hurt most. He hadn't just fallen out of love with me. He'd fallen in love with her, specifically because she possessed all the qualities he found lacking in me. I wasn't just losing him. I was being replaced by an upgrade, by someone who made him feel alive in ways I never could. That evening, I finally listened to one of his voicemails. His voice was panicked, desperate. "Baby, please, I know you heard the message. It wasn't supposed to go to you. I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Please come home so we can talk about this. It's not what it sounded like, I promise. I love you. I love you so much. Please don't disappear on me." But I'd heard what it sounded like. I'd heard him tell another woman, my best friend, that he felt dead inside when he was with me, that our physical relationship was a chore, that I was boring and predictable, and everything he didn't want in a partner. There was no context that could make those words hurt less. No explanation that could undo the casual cruelty of his assessment. He'd revealed who he really was and how he really saw me, and now he was sorry I'd found out. By Friday, the messages had escalated to full panic mode. He showed up at the hospital during my shift, forcing security to escort him out when I refused to see him. My supervisor pulled me aside, clearly concerned about my well-being and the disruption to the ward. His voicemails became increasingly desperate. "Please, just 5 minutes. Let me explain what really happened." I was frustrated and angry about work stuff, and I said things I didn't mean. "You know I love you. You know our relationship is real. Don't throw away 4 years because of one stupid message." But that wasn't what I'd heard. I'd heard someone speaking with complete honesty to the person he actually wanted to be with. There was no anger in his voice, no frustration, just raw truth and longing directed at my replacement. Her messages took a different approach. She sent a series of voice messages that I finally forced myself to listen to, each one more manipulative than the last. I know how this looks, but you have to understand. He kissed me. I was completely shocked. I pushed him away immediately, but he kept talking about how unhappy he was, how confused he felt. I told him he was being ridiculous, that he was probably just having pre-wedding jitters. Then, I swear to you, on my mother's grave, nothing has been going on between us. He caught me at a vulnerable moment. You know how things have been with my job, and I didn't handle it well. But I never encouraged this. I would never do that to you. And finally, the things he said about you in that message. I need you to know I disagree with all of it. I told him he was being cruel and stupid. You're not boring or predictable. You're steady and loving and everything good in this world. He doesn't deserve you if he can't see that. The last message was the most insulting of all. If she'd really disagreed with his assessment of me, if she'd really told him he was being cruel, then why was she meeting him alone in my apartment? Why was she kissing him back? Why was she helping him plan his escape from our relationship? More importantly, the fact that she felt comfortable enough to record these elaborate lies told me she thought I was stupid enough to believe them. After 15 years of friendship, she was betting on my loyalty and naivety to get her out of this mess. But I wasn't that person anymore. Tuesday night had burned away whatever trusting, forgiving version of myself had existed before hearing that message. The woman sitting in this tiny rented room was someone harder, more skeptical, less willing to accept comfortable lies. I started thinking about the past few months differently. Her enthusiasm for wedding planning took on a sinister quality. Was she gathering intelligence? When she helped me pick out bridesmaid dresses, was she already imagining wearing white to my venue? I remembered her asking detailed questions about our relationship. How often do you guys have sex? Do you think he's happy? Don't you ever want more excitement? At the time, I'd thought she was being a good friend, showing interest in my life. Now I realized she was conducting research. The Friday night dinners, the weekend trips, the constant presence in our apartment. She hadn't been spending time with us as a couple. She'd been spending time with him while I happened to be there. I was the third wheel in my own relationship. His messages grew more aggressive as the weekend approached. I know you're getting her messages too. Don't listen to her version of what happened. She's trying to save face, but she wanted this just as much as I did. Maybe more. She's been flirting with me for months. So now they were turning on each other, each trying to throw the other under the bus to minimize their own culpability. He was painting her as the seductress. She was painting him as the aggressor. Both narratives conveniently ignored the months of emotional infidelity and systematic undermining of my self-worth. I typed and deleted 100 responses to both of them. Part of me wanted to unleash all my rage, to tell them exactly what their betrayal had cost me. But a larger part of me understood that engaging with them at all would give them what they wanted. Access to me, a chance to manipulate the narrative, an opportunity to make me doubt my own perceptions. Instead, I focused on practical matters. I called our wedding venue and explained there had been a family emergency. The deposits were non-refundable, but they agreed to hold the date in case we wanted to reschedule. I couldn't bear to say the word canceled yet. I contacted the photographer, the florist, the caterer. Each conversation was humiliating in its own way. These people had been excited about our wedding, had invested time in making our day special. Now I was the woman whose groom had changed his mind 6 weeks before the ceremony. The hardest call was to my parents. I'd been putting it off for days, but they needed to know before they started their drive from Florida. My mother answered on the second ring, immediately sensing something was wrong. "The wedding is off," I managed to say before breaking down completely. "What happened, sweetheart? Did you two have a fight?" How could I explain that my fiancé had accidentally sent me a voice message meant for my maid of honor, detailing how repulsive he found me and how much he preferred her? How could I tell my mother that the man she'd welcomed into our family thought I was boring and predictable and dead inside? "He's been having an affair," I said finally. It was simpler than the whole truth, but it covered the essential facts. The silence that followed was deafening. Then my father's voice in the background. "An affair? That son of a bitch." "With who?" my mother asked quietly. I couldn't say her name. After 15 years of my mother treating her like a second daughter, I couldn't be the one to destroy that relationship too. "Someone I trusted," I said, and started crying again. The worst part about trauma is how it rewrites your past. Sitting alone in my rented room, I began analyzing every moment of our relationship through the lens of his brutal honesty. Had I always been boring? Was there a specific moment when he decided I wasn't worth his genuine affection anymore? I remembered our third anniversary dinner at that Italian restaurant downtown. I'd worn a red dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, something more daring than my usual style. Throughout dinner, he seemed distracted, checking his phone repeatedly. I'd asked if everything was okay, and he'd said work was stressing him out. Now I wondered, was that when it started? Had she texted him that night? Had he been comparing me to some fantasy version of her while I sat across from him, trying to be more interesting? The cruel precision of his words haunted me. She's exactly the same person she was 4 years ago. I'd thought consistency was a virtue, but he saw it as stagnation. When had wanting stability become evidence of my inadequacy? I started obsessing over physical details. Mechanical. Obligatory. How long had our intimate moments been performances on his part? I replayed recent memories with this new knowledge, and they felt contaminated. Every time I'd initiated contact, every time I'd thought we were connecting, had he been lying there thinking about her instead? The comparison was the cruelest part. It wasn't just that he'd fallen out of love with me. He'd fallen in love with someone who embodied everything he found lacking in me. She was alive where I was dead inside. She was interesting where I was predictable. She was sexy in ways she could never be. I found myself studying my reflection obsessively, cataloging all the ways I apparently failed to measure up. My brown hair that I'd always thought was pretty. Was it too ordinary? My preference for comfortable clothes over trendy ones. Was that what made me bland? My habit of asking about his day and sharing mine? Was that the same conversation he found so tedious? The worst part was that I could see his point. Compared to her, I probably was boring. She worked nights at an upscale bar, had stories about interesting customers and wild adventures. She dated different men, traveled spontaneously, had a wardrobe full of clothes I'd never have the confidence to wear. I was a pediatric nurse who went to bed early, saved money religiously, and found joy in quiet evenings at home. I'd thought he appreciated my stability, my reliability, my genuine interest in building a life together. Instead, he'd been suffocating under the weight of my predictability. By the second week, I'd developed insomnia. I'd lie awake replaying moments from our relationship, analyzing them for signs I'd missed. The time he'd suggested we take a break from our Friday night dinners with her, had that been guilt? The way he'd started working late more often, had he been meeting her? I remembered her asking me once if I ever got jealous of other women. At the time, I'd laughed and said I trusted him completely. She'd given me this odd look and said, "But don't you ever worry that someone more exciting might come along?" I'd thought she was being protective, helping me think about potential threats to our relationship. Now I understood she wasn't warning me about hypothetical threats. She was testing my awareness of the very real threat she represented. The isolation was becoming unbearable. I'd built my entire social life around the two of them, and now I had no one. My coworkers were friendly, but not close friends. My family was worried, but 800 miles away. I was learning what it meant to be truly alone for the first time in my adult life. I started having panic attacks at work. Small things would trigger them. A voice message notification, seeing a couple holding hands, hearing someone talk about their wedding plans. My supervisor suggested I take some time off, but work was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. The questions wouldn't stop circling in my mind. How long had they been talking about me behind my back? How many of our friend conversations had really been strategy sessions about my relationship? When she gave me relationship advice, was she secretly working to undermine everything she was supposedly helping me fix? I thought about all the times she'd been alone with him while I was working late shifts. All the times she'd crashed on our couch and I'd left for work the next morning while they were both still asleep. All the intimate details I'd shared with her about our relationship, our problems, our plans, information she could use to position herself as the perfect alternative. The betrayal felt infinite, spreading backward through years of memories and poisoning them all. Every laugh we'd shared, every secret she'd kept for me, every moment of support during difficult times, all of it was now suspect. How much of our friendship had been real, and how much had been reconnaissance? But the most devastating realization was that maybe he was right about me. Maybe I was everything he'd said. Boring. Predictable. The same person I'd been 4 years ago. Maybe that message wasn't cruelty. Maybe it was just honesty delivered to the wrong recipient. Maybe I deserved to be replaced by someone more interesting, more alive, more worthy of genuine desire. Maybe the problem wasn't that he'd been lying to me for months. Maybe the problem was that I'd never been worth telling the truth to in the first place. 3 weeks after hearing that message, I finally agreed to meet him. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because I needed answers to the questions that were eating me alive. We met at a coffee shop across town, somewhere with no shared memories to contaminate. He looked terrible, unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, wearing the same t-shirt he'd had for years. Part of me felt satisfied seeing him suffer. A larger part felt nothing at all, which scared me more. "Thank you for coming," he started, reaching across the table like he might try to hold my hand. I pulled back instinctively. "I need you to explain something to me," I said, cutting straight to what mattered. "In that message, you didn't just say you were attracted to someone else. You gave a detailed analysis of everything that's wrong with me as a person. I need to know if that's really how you see me." He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair. I was frustrated that day. I'd had a horrible meeting with my boss, and I was just, I don't know, I wasn't thinking clearly. "Don't." I kept my voice steady, though my hands were shaking. That message wasn't angry ranting. "You spoke for 5 minutes about how boring and predictable I am. You compared our sex life to a chore. You said you felt dead inside when you were with me. Those weren't heat-of-the-moment words. That was your honest assessment of who I am." He stared at his coffee cup. "I never meant for you to hear that. But you meant every word when you said it to her." I leaned forward. "I need to know. How long have you felt this way about me? How long have you been faking everything?" "I haven't been faking." "Stop lying." The words came out louder than I intended, causing other customers to look our way. I lowered my voice. "I heard you tell her that our physical relationship was mechanical and obligatory. I heard you say you had to fake interest and enthusiasm. How long has that been true?" He was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I don't know. Maybe 6 months? Maybe longer. I kept thinking it was just a rough patch, that the spark would come back. So you've been lying in my bed, touching me, telling me you loved me, while feeling absolutely nothing." "It wasn't nothing. I do love you, just not the way you love her." I wasn't asking. I was stating a fact we both knew was true. He nodded miserably. "I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I never wanted to hurt you like this. But you did want to hurt me. You and she have been discussing my inadequacies for months. You said in that message that she was everything I wasn't. Alive, interesting, sexy. You didn't stumble into that comparison. You've been building it systematically. She never said anything bad about you," he protested. "She kept telling me I was wrong, that you were great. While kissing you in our apartment." I cut him off. "While helping you realize what real desire felt like. While listening to you describe me as bland and boring and agreeing enough to sleep with you anyway." His face flushed. "We didn't sleep together. It was just that one kiss. Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't insult my intelligence any more than you already have. You told her you loved her. You talked about ending things with me to start something real with her. That doesn't happen after one impulsive kiss." He slumped in his chair, finally dropping the pretense. "We didn't plan this. It just developed over time. We tried to fight it. How noble of you both." The sarcasm felt good, like finding my voice again. "Tell me about the trying to fight it. Was that when you were analyzing my personality defects? Or when you were comparing my body to hers? Or when you were discussing how much happier you'd be without me?" "It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that." I stood up, no longer caring who was watching. "You didn't just cheat on me. You turned me into a joke, a problem to be solved, an obstacle to your happiness. You took everything I thought was good about myself and made it evidence of why I deserved to be discarded." He looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "I love you. I know I fucked up, but I do love you. Can't we try to work through this?" For a moment, seeing him cry, I almost felt something like sympathy. This was the man I'd planned to marry, the person I'd trusted with my heart and my future. But then I remembered his voice in that message, not sad or conflicted, but excited and alive in a way he'd apparently never been with me. "No," I said simply. "You can't love someone you have so little respect for. And I can't be with someone who sees me the way you do." "The wedding. There is no wedding. I've already started canceling everything." I picked up my purse. "One more question. Did she help you plan this conversation? Did you two discuss what you'd say to convince me to take you back?" His silence was answer enough. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Clarity. He'd confirmed everything I'd suspected and more. This hadn't been a moment of weakness or a mistake born of confusion. It had been a systematic emotional affair built on their mutual agreement that I was inadequate. But for the first time since hearing that message, I wondered if maybe his assessment of me said more about him than about me. After leaving the coffee shop, I felt strangely energized. For weeks, I'd been drowning in self-doubt, wondering if everything he'd said about me was true. But seeing him try to minimize and manipulate what I'd heard gave me a different perspective. This wasn't someone whose opinion I should value. This was someone who'd spent months lying to my face while plotting his escape. I decided I needed to understand the full scope of their deception. If I was going to rebuild my life, I needed to know exactly what I was rebuilding from. I still had access to our shared cloud storage account, photos, documents, everything we'd accumulated over 4 years together. I'd been avoiding it, afraid of what I might find, but now I was ready to face the truth. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. In a folder marked Work Stuff, his clever hiding place, I found months of screenshot conversations between them. Not the actual message thread, but screenshots she'd sent him of our conversations, with her commentary added. March 15th. A screenshot of me texting her about being worried that he seemed distant lately. Her response to him? She's so needy. Can't she just give you space without making it about her insecurities? April 2nd. A screenshot of me asking her advice about surprising him for his birthday. Her response? God, she tries so hard. It's actually kind of sad. The whole surprise thing is so predictable. April 20th. A screenshot of me confiding that our physical relationship felt off lately, asking if she thought it was normal for couples to go through dry spells. Her response, maybe he's just bored. Some people need more excitement than others. I sat in my tiny room, staring at months of evidence that my best friend had been systematically undermining me while pretending to offer support. Every vulnerable moment I'd shared with her, every insecurity I'd confided, every piece of relationship advice I'd sought, she'd turned into ammunition against me. But the screenshots revealed something else. My instincts had been right. I had noticed his distance. I had sensed something was wrong. I had tried to address problems in our relationship. I wasn't the oblivious, complacent partner their narrative painted me as. I was someone who'd been gaslighted into doubting my own perceptions. The commentary got crueler as the months progressed. By June, she was openly mocking my attempts to reconnect with him. June 10th, screenshot of me suggesting we plan a weekend getaway. Her response, she really thinks a change of scenery will fix whatever's wrong with her personality. June 25th, screenshot of me asking if she thought I should be more spontaneous. Her response, you can't teach someone to be interesting. Either you have it or you don't. But the most damaging discovery came in a folder marked Future Plans. They'd been planning their life together while I was planning our wedding. Apartment listings in different neighborhoods, screenshots of vacation destinations, even a pros and cons list about timing. When would be the best moment to end things with me? Under cons, they'd listed, wedding deposits already paid. Her parents really like me. Might look bad at work. Under pros, can finally be honest. No more pretending. She'll probably be fine. She's stronger than she thinks. They'd reduced the destruction of my life to a cost-benefit analysis. My emotional devastation was acceptable collateral damage as long as the timing worked out for them. I found drafts of the conversation he'd planned to have with me. Multiple versions refined over weeks. Version 1, I think we've grown apart. Maybe we should postpone the wedding. Version 2, I've been feeling confused about us lately. I need some time to figure things out. Version 3, I don't think I'm ready for marriage. It's not you, it's me. Each version was designed to make me blame myself while giving him the freedom to pursue her. They'd workshopped different ways to destroy me while maintaining their moral superiority. But the final document in that folder changed everything. It was a text draft she'd written but never sent, dated 2 days before his accidental voice message. I can't keep watching you pretend to be happy with her. It's not fair to any of us. She deserves someone who actually wants to be with her. And you deserve to be with someone who makes you feel alive. Maybe it's time to stop being a coward and tell her the truth. She hadn't been a passive victim of his pursuit. She'd been pushing him to end our relationship. She'd been the one encouraging him to stop pretending to be happy with me. The woman I'd trusted with my deepest secrets, who'd held me while I cried about my grandmother's death, who'd been my maid of honor. She'd been actively working to destroy my relationship while comforting me about the very problems she was helping to create. I realized then that his assessment of me as boring and predictable wasn't objective truth. It was a narrative they'd constructed together to justify their betrayal. They needed me to be inadequate to make their affair feel righteous instead of selfish. But looking at these conversations, I could see something they couldn't. I hadn't been the problem in our relationship. I'd been the solution they were determined to reject. I'd noticed his distance and tried to address it. I'd sensed our connection was fading and made efforts to rekindle it. I'd been vulnerable about my insecurities and sought help from someone I trusted. I'd done everything a loving partner should do when facing relationship challenges. Their conspiracy hadn't been necessary because I was failing. It had been necessary because I was succeeding. Because despite their months of sabotage, I was still trying to save what we had. For the first time in a month, I felt something other than shame and self-doubt. I felt rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage at two people who'd spent months psychologically torturing me while pretending to love and support me. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd made me complicit in my own destruction by turning my best friend into a weapon against my relationship and my self-worth. But they'd also made a crucial mistake. They'd documented everything. The rage felt different from the despair I'd been drowning in for weeks. It was energizing, clarifying, almost intoxicating after so much self-doubt. For the first time since hearing that voice message, I felt like myself again. Or maybe like a stronger version of myself I'd never known existed. I spent the weekend methodically canceling every aspect of our wedding. Not with the shame and embarrassment I'd felt before, but with the satisfaction of dismantling something that had been built on lies. The venue manager was surprisingly understanding when I explained there had been a significant betrayal of trust. She even offered to write a letter confirming the cancellation was due to the groom's infidelity, which might help with insurance claims on the non-refundable deposits. The photographer was less sympathetic about losing the booking, but agreed to apply half our deposit toward a portrait session if I ever wanted professional photos for myself. Breakup photos are becoming really popular, she said. Very empowering. I found myself laughing at that, actually laughing for the first time in a month. The idea of doing a photo shoot celebrating my freedom from someone who found me boring suddenly seemed brilliant. But the real turning point came when I called my supervisor at the hospital. I'd been dreading the conversation, expecting pity or awkward questions about my personal life. Instead, she said something that stopped me cold. "I'm sorry you're going through this, but I have to say, you seem more like yourself this week than you have in months. More confident, more present with the patients. Whatever you're working through, it's bringing out something good in you. More like myself." The phrase echoed in my mind all weekend. He'd criticized me for being exactly the same person she was 4 years ago, as if that were evidence of my failure to grow. But maybe being the same person meant I'd never lost sight of who I really was, despite months of subtle psychological manipulation designed to make me doubt myself. I started thinking about the woman I'd been before our relationship began to deteriorate. I remembered being confident at work, making friends easily, having opinions and interests that didn't require his approval. When had I started second-guessing everything, asking his permission for decisions I was perfectly capable of making alone? I realized it had been gradual, so subtle I hadn't noticed it happening. A dismissive comment here, a lack of enthusiasm there, slowly training me to seek his approval and doubt my own instincts. Classic emotional manipulation disguised as normal relationship dynamics. Monday morning, I walked into work with a different energy. Instead of hiding my situation, I was honest when colleagues asked how I was doing. My fiancé had an affair with my best friend, so I'm starting over, I'd say matter-of-factly. It's been difficult, but I'm discovering things about myself I'd forgotten. The responses surprised me. Instead of pity, I got respect. Instead of awkward silence, I got stories. Other people who'd survived betrayals, who'd rebuilt their lives, who'd discovered strength they didn't know they possessed. My colleague from the NICU, someone I'd always admired but barely knew personally, invited me to lunch. "I went through something similar 5 years ago," she said. "Best thing that ever happened to me, though I couldn't see it at the time. Want to hear what I learned?" Over salad and sandwiches, she told me about her ex-husband's affair and how it had led to her going back to school for her master's degree, taking a promotion she'd never thought she was qualified for, and eventually meeting someone who actually appreciated her ambition instead of feeling threatened by it. "The hardest part," she said, "was realizing how small I'd made myself to keep him comfortable. When that relationship ended, I had to remember who I was before I started editing myself for someone else's approval." That phrase hit me like lightning. Editing myself for someone else's approval. That's exactly what I'd been doing. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being myself and started being his version of an acceptable girlfriend. Quieter, less demanding, more accommodating. I thought about my old hobbies that had gradually disappeared. I used to paint watercolors on Sunday mornings, but he'd made comments about the smell of the paints and the mess on the kitchen table. I used to go to book clubs and community events, but he'd always had something else he wanted us to do together. I used to speak up more at work, but he'd made jokes about me being too serious about my job. Little by little, I'd shrunk myself to fit his preferences, and then he'd criticized me for being small. That evening, I drove to an art supply store and bought watercolor paints, brushes, and good paper. I set up at the small desk in my rented room and painted for 3 hours. Abstract shapes in bright colors, nothing representational, just pure expression of feeling. It felt like coming back to life. I started making other small changes. I bought clothes I liked instead of clothes I thought he'd approve of. I made plans with work colleagues I'd always wanted to know better. I signed up for a pottery class that met Thursday evenings, something I'd mentioned wanting to try for years but had never prioritized. Most importantly, I stopped checking my phone obsessively for messages from him or her. I'd blocked both their numbers after finding those screenshots, and the silence felt like freedom instead of abandonment. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't mourning the loss of our relationship. I was celebrating the rediscovery of myself. 6 weeks after hearing that voice message, something remarkable happened. I got a promotion. The head nurse position in pediatric intensive care had opened up unexpectedly, and my supervisor recommended me for it. The interview process was rigorous, but I approached it with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. "You've shown remarkable resilience and growth over the past month," the department head said during my final interview. "Your colleagues speak very highly of your leadership during difficult situations, and your patient outcomes have always been exemplary." When they offered me the position, I almost cried, not from stress or overwhelm, but from pure pride. This was something I'd earned through my own competence and character, not something that depended on anyone else's approval or validation. The promotion came with a significant raise, enough that I could afford my own one-bedroom apartment near the hospital. As I signed the lease, I realized this was the first living space in 4 years that was entirely mine. No shared decisions, no compromises, no walking on eggshells around someone else's preferences. I furnished it exactly as I wanted. Bright colors, plants everywhere, a dedicated corner for painting with good natural light. The walls were covered with my artwork, photos of my family, and inspirational quotes that actually meant something to me. It felt like a physical manifestation of reclaiming my identity. But the real revelation came through my interactions with new people who had no preconceptions about who I was supposed to be. At pottery class, I was surprised to discover that other students found me funny, not in a self-deprecating way, but genuinely witty and engaging. The instructor, a woman in her 60s who'd been teaching for decades, pulled me aside after the 3rd class. "You have wonderful creative instincts," she said, examining a vase I'd thrown. "But more than that, you bring such positive energy to the group. Have you ever considered teaching? You'd be wonderful with children." I started volunteering to teach art classes at a community center on weekends. The kids loved my energy and enthusiasm, qualities that had apparently always been there, but had been systematically diminished in my previous relationship. At work, my new role revealed leadership abilities I didn't know I possessed. When dealing with crisis situations, I was calm and decisive. When mediating conflicts between staff members, I was diplomatic but firm. When comforting families facing their worst nightmares, I was compassionate but strong. "You're not the same person who started here 3 years ago," my former supervisor observed. "There's something different about you, more confident, more sure of yourself." But I was the same person. That was the beautiful realization. I was exactly who I'd always been underneath all the self-doubt and second-guessing. The difference was that I was no longer filtering myself through someone else's critical lens. The watercolor paintings I'd started as therapy evolved into something more serious. I began selling pieces at local art fairs, and even got commissioned to paint a mural for the hospital's children's wing. The pediatric patients loved watching me work, and I loved their uninhibited enthusiasm for color and creativity. 3 months after the breakup, I ran into him at a grocery store. I'd been dreading this moment, imagining how awkward and painful it would be. Instead, I felt nothing but mild curiosity about someone who used to be important to me. He looked worse than when I'd seen him at the coffee shop. Thinner, tired, somehow diminished. He approached me cautiously, as if I might flee or cause a scene. "You look," he started, then seemed to struggle for words. "You look really good. Happy." "I am happy," I said simply, and meant it completely. "I've been wanting to talk to you," he continued, "to apologize properly. What we did was wrong, and the way we did it was cruel. You deserved so much better." I studied his face, looking for the man I'd once loved, once planned to marry. He was there, but somehow smaller than I remembered. Had he always been this way? Or had my perception of him been inflated by my need for his approval? "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate that." He seemed surprised by my calm response. "How are you doing?" "Really? Really?" "I'm doing better than I've done in years. The promotion at work is going well. I'm painting again. I have new friends. I'm discovering who I am when I'm not trying to be someone else's version of perfect." Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or recognition of what he'd lost. "I heard about the promotion. That's wonderful. You deserve it." He paused. "I also heard about the art classes and the mural. I always knew you were talented, but you never seemed that interested in pursuing it seriously." "I was interested," I said quietly, "but someone convinced me it wasn't practical or important enough to prioritize." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I did that, didn't I?" "We both did. I let myself become smaller to keep you comfortable, and you encouraged it because it made you feel more important." I shifted my shopping basket to my other arm. "But that's not your fault entirely. I made those choices." "Are you—" He hesitated. "Are you seeing anyone?" The question surprised me with how little it affected me. "I'm focusing on myself right now. I'm learning that I actually like my own company." "And her?" I asked, not because I cared deeply, but because I was curious about how their grand love affair was working out. His expression darkened. "We broke up 2 months ago." I felt a small, satisfied smile tug at my lips. "What happened?" "Turns out," he said bitterly, "she's pretty high maintenance and dramatic, and she expected me to completely change my life around her schedule and preferences." He caught himself. "I guess I finally understood how unfair it is to expect someone to be different than who they really are." I almost laughed. He'd discovered that the exciting and unpredictable woman he'd left me for was actually just difficult to be with. The qualities he'd found so attractive from a distance became exhausting when he had to live with them daily. "I'm sorry it didn't work out," I said, and surprised myself by meaning it. Not because I wanted him back, but because I genuinely wished him well. "Do you think—" he started, then stopped. "Never mind." "What? Do you think there's any chance for us?" "I know I hurt you, but I realize now what I lost. You're an amazing woman, and I was too stupid to see it." For a moment, I felt a familiar tug. The old habit of wanting to fix things, to make other people happy, to be understanding and forgiving. But then I remembered who I'd become over the past few months, and the feeling passed. "I think you need to figure out who you are and what you actually want," I said gently. "Because the person you fell in love with was never the problem. The problem was that you decided to be unhappy and then blamed me for your unhappiness." I started to walk away, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I forgive you both. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger around was poisoning my joy. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." As I walked to my car, I realized something profound had just happened. I'd faced the person whose opinion had once defined my self-worth, and I'd felt completely secure in who I was with or without his approval. That night, I painted until dawn, bold, confident strokes and colors that made me happy. I was no longer the woman who'd been too boring and predictable to keep a man's attention. I was someone entirely new, built from the strength I'd discovered in my lowest moment. 8 months after that devastating voice message changed my life, I received an unexpected call from an old mutual friend. She was getting married and wanted to give me a heads up that both my ex-fiancé and former best friend were invited to the wedding. More importantly, she wanted me to know they were bringing dates. "Different dates," she clarified. "They broke up months ago, and apparently it got pretty ugly. I thought you should know in case you wanted to avoid any awkward encounters." I thanked her for the warning, but realized with surprise that the news barely affected me. I felt a mild curiosity about how their grand romance had imploded, but no satisfaction or vindication. They'd become characters in a story that no longer had any bearing on my actual life. A few days later, that same friend called back with gossip she couldn't resist sharing. "I probably shouldn't tell you this," she began, which immediately meant she absolutely was going to tell me. "But I heard from someone who works with him that he's been complaining about how unstable and demanding she was. Apparently, she wanted him to move in with her immediately, quit his job to travel together, and got jealous whenever he talked to other women. The irony was so perfect it almost felt scripted. He'd left me because I was boring and predictable, only to discover that exciting and unpredictable were exhausting to live with. The woman he'd praised for being spontaneous turned out to be impulsive and controlling. And get this," my friend continued, "she's been telling people that he was emotionally unavailable and commitment phobic. Apparently, she expected him to propose after 3 months, and when he said it was too soon, she accused him of still being in love with you. I found myself genuinely laughing at that revelation. After spending months systematically undermining my relationship and self-worth to justify their affair, they'd discovered they didn't actually like each other very much when forced to be together honestly. The best part, she concluded, is that she's been reaching out to mutual friends, trying to get people to choose sides. But nobody wants to get involved because everyone knows what they did to you. She's basically made herself a pariah. That information did give me a small sense of justice. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because actions having consequences felt like cosmic balance being restored. But the real confirmation of my growth came a few weeks later when I ran into her at a coffee shop downtown. I was meeting a new friend, someone from my pottery class who'd become genuinely close, when I spotted her sitting alone at a corner table, looking miserable. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw recognition, shame, and something that might have been longing. She looked like she wanted to approach me, maybe to apologize or explain or beg for forgiveness. A year ago, I would have felt compelled to go over, to hear her out, to try to understand her perspective and possibly rebuild our friendship. The people-pleasing part of me would have convinced myself that forgiveness meant reconciliation. Instead, I gave her a polite nod. Not hostile, not warm, just acknowledgement that we were two people who used to know each other, and continued my conversation with my friend. Later, as we were leaving, she did approach me. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. "I don't think that would be productive for either of us," I replied calmly. "I hope you're doing well." She looked stunned by my response, as if she'd expected either anger or automatic forgiveness. The idea that I might simply be indifferent to her seemed not to have occurred to her. "I just want you to know," she said quickly, "that I never meant for things to happen the way they did. I was confused and stupid, and I've regretted it every day since." "I believe you," I said, and I did. "But that doesn't change anything. What you did revealed who you are as a person, and that's not someone I want in my life." "But we were friends for 15 years, she pleaded. "Doesn't that mean anything?" "It means I learned an important lesson about the difference between someone who acts like a friend and someone who actually is one." I paused, not wanting to be cruel but needing to be clear. A real friend wouldn't have spent months psychologically undermining me while pretending to offer support. She started to cry then, and I felt a familiar tug of sympathy. But I also remembered the screenshots of our conversations, her mocking commentary on my neediness and attempts to improve my relationship, her active encouragement of his criticism of me. "I'm not the same person I was then," she said through tears. "Losing you, losing him, losing friends who found out what we did, it made me realize how terrible I was. I've been in therapy, working on myself." "That's good," I said genuinely. "I hope therapy helps you figure out why you thought it was acceptable to betray someone who trusted you completely. But that work is for you, not for me." As I walked away from that encounter, I realized something profound had shifted in me. I no longer needed to be needed. I no longer felt responsible for other people's emotional comfort at the expense of my own well-being. I could acknowledge her pain without feeling obligated to relieve it. The woman I'd become over the past 8 months wouldn't have been recognizable to the person who'd received that devastating voice message. That woman had been so afraid of being disliked, so desperate for approval, so convinced that her worth depended on other people's happiness with her. This woman knew her own value and didn't need external validation to feel complete. This woman had boundaries and enforced them without guilt. This woman understood that forgiveness didn't require relationship restoration. That night, I added another painting to my growing collection, this one featuring a butterfly emerging from a chrysalis, surrounded by bright, bold colors that represented all the joy I'd discovered in my own company. I was no longer the woman who'd been too boring to keep someone's interest. I was someone who'd learned that being interesting to myself was more important than being interesting to someone who couldn't appreciate my value. I was someone who'd turned the worst betrayal of my life into the foundation for becoming the most authentic version of myself I'd ever been. 1 year after receiving that voice message that destroyed my life and rebuilt it better, I was sitting in my art studio, the spare bedroom of my beautiful one-bedroom apartment, putting finishing touches on a painting commissioned by the hospital's board of directors. They wanted something for the new family counseling center, and they'd specifically requested my work. The painting was called Growth After Storm, abstract figures in muted blues and grays gradually transforming into vibrant yellows and oranges. It represented exactly what I'd experienced, the way devastation could become the soil for something more beautiful than what had been destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text from my parents. "Can't wait to see you next weekend. Dad's already planning which restaurants we'll try." They were visiting for the opening of my first solo art show at a local gallery. 15 paintings chronicling my journey from betrayal to self-discovery, with proceeds benefiting the children's art therapy program I'd started at the hospital. The art show had been my colleague's idea, the same one who'd first noticed I seemed more like myself after the breakup. "You should share this work," she'd said after seeing my latest pieces. "Not just because it's beautiful, but because other people need to see that survival can look like this." As I cleaned my brushes, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The head nurse position had led to opportunities I'd never imagined, speaking at conferences about pediatric care, consulting on hospital art therapy programs, even being interviewed for a magazine article about healthcare workers who pursued creative passions. But the external changes were nothing compared to the internal transformation. I'd learned to trust my own instincts, to value my own opinions, to find joy in my own company. I no longer filtered my thoughts and feelings through the lens of someone else's approval. The woman who'd been devastated by being called boring and predictable had discovered that consistency was actually a superpower. Patients and families trusted me because they knew I'd show up, keep my promises, and provide stable support during their worst moments. My art students loved my reliability and encouragement. My friends valued my loyalty and authenticity. What he'd seen as character flaws were actually character strengths that he'd been too immature to appreciate. I'd also learned the difference between loneliness and solitude. For years, I'd been afraid to be alone with my thoughts, constantly seeking validation and companionship to feel complete. Now, some of my happiest moments were spent painting in silence, walking through parks by myself, or reading in coffee shops without needing to share the experience with anyone else. That didn't mean I was isolated. I'd built genuine friendships with people who appreciated who I actually was, not who they wanted me to be. My pottery class friends, my colleagues, my art therapy students' families. I was surrounded by people who saw my authenticity as a gift, not a flaw. A few months earlier, I'd started dating someone new, a teacher I'd met at the community center where I volunteered. What struck me most about our relationship was how effortless it felt to be myself around him. He found my predictability charming rather than boring, appreciated my reliability rather than taking it for granted, and actively encouraged my artistic pursuits rather than viewing them as inconvenient hobbies. "I love that you're exactly who you seem to be," he'd told me after our third date. "No games, no pretense, just genuine kindness and intelligence. It's refreshing." The contrast to my previous relationship was stark. Instead of making me feel like I needed to be more exciting to keep his interest, he made me feel like my natural personality was exactly what he'd been hoping to find. Instead of criticism disguised as helpful suggestions, he offered genuine compliments and support. But more importantly, I didn't need his validation to feel worthy. I'd learned to generate my own sense of self-worth, so his appreciation felt like a wonderful bonus rather than a desperate necessity. As for my ex-fiancé and former best friend, I'd heard updates through mutual acquaintances over the past year. He'd dated several women briefly, apparently repeating the same pattern: initial excitement followed by criticism and emotional withdrawal when they didn't meet his impossible standards. According to friends, he'd developed a reputation as someone who was never satisfied, always looking for something better. She'd moved to a different city after burning most of her bridges locally. The mutual friends who'd initially been sympathetic to her claims of remorse had grown tired of her dramatic stories and victim narratives. Last I'd heard, she was in another complicated situation with a married man, apparently having learned nothing from our experience. But their stories no longer interested me much. They'd become cautionary tales rather than sources of pain, examples of what happened when people built relationships on criticism and competition rather than genuine appreciation and support. The most profound realization of this entire journey was understanding that his cruel assessment of me had revealed more about his character than mine. Someone who truly loved me wouldn't have been able to speak about me with such casual dismissiveness. Someone who valued me as a person wouldn't have systematically cataloged my inadequacies for another woman's entertainment. The message that had initially destroyed my self-worth had actually been a gift, a glimpse behind the mask he'd been wearing for months, showing me who he really was when he thought I couldn't hear him. It had freed me from a relationship with someone who was fundamentally incapable of appreciating what I had to offer. Now, surrounded by people who saw my consistency as strength, my kindness as wisdom, and my authenticity as rare and valuable, I understood that the problem had never been me. The problem had been trying to force myself into a relationship with someone who was determined to be dissatisfied. I finished cleaning my brushes and stood back to admire the completed painting. Tomorrow, I'd deliver it to the hospital, where it would hang in a space dedicated to helping families heal from trauma. Next weekend, I'd open my first solo art show to a room full of people who celebrated my growth rather than criticized my stability. That voice message had been meant to destroy me, but instead, it had revealed my strength. I'd learned that being abandoned by people who didn't value me wasn't a tragedy. It was an opportunity to find people who did. I was no longer the woman who'd been too boring to keep a man's attention. I was someone who'd discovered that the right person wouldn't want me to be anyone other than exactly who I was. And until that person came along, I was perfectly happy being that person all by myself. The woman who'd vomited from shame and devastation a year ago had been reborn as someone who knew her own worth and wouldn't accept less than she deserved. That transformation, born from the ashes of betrayal, was the greatest work of art I'd ever created.